Make peace with the mist. Hello everyone. Today, it's the morning and I'm walking and it's very misty and there's no one here. Aside all life. I would like to specifically talk about how there are certain moments in human experience where you are met with clouds of confusion. You are met with a mist in which you cannot clearly see the truth of your reality, but you know you're somewhere, you know you're here, you know. So where does one go? Well, you need to be very careful because multidimensionality requires an existential allowance that is, in a sense, allowing involvement without getting directly involved. So what that means is that many people throughout their life are constantly thinking of doing things and then go do them, right? However, on a subtler level, before the intention manifests to even the thought of you going to do that, if you allow life, you will see, you will get all the things that you're required to in the day without your linear involvement. What that means is that sometimes I wake up and I just trust the flows of life I'm in. And so I just walk and I see that every moment is a state and moment of improv, where I simply see that where I once stood and there was nothing, now there are birds chirping. So you begin to hear and recognize that your involvement with life is one, on a personal level, how you observe truth, and another, how you are in a sense conditioned to accept truth as a social creature. So the social creature is still doing its thing. You're not supposed to, in a sense, change the social creature because you're ruining that development. What advanced communicators and pilots of consciousness recognize that in how life is moving very intuitively and innately within you, you begin to see that things are being done regardless of if you conceive it or not. What that means is that if before you were born there's a train station that goes from one city to this city, regardless of your awareness or not, it's happening. And so if you're close to that train station, you suddenly see its reality. So many people have great vision, but there's a distance of reality between them and their vision. What that means is that parts of you has really observed the greatness of your ability, but parts of you are so convinced of your solidity here. So what happens is that if your solidity does not trust its environment, it would not choose to integrate. So you as an idea will always remain individualized to a degree that you are not allowing others to be present just like you. When I do not have the same value of existential presence for one human being because of his differences, physical differences, that means that I am not looking clearly. All hate comes from a lack of clarity of where you are. Because if you are here, there is no reason to hate, because everything is kept by love. And so this love is not really that poetic and mystical, but it is simply the understanding that it is your collective consciousness that is keeping your individuality here. Man is at a point where he can explore more of the drop of spirituality, which he was once called, compared to the great oceans that lied beyond him and before him. You know, you see that time is simply how you playfully move from this dimension to another dimension, how time and space fluctuate. And so they do because you're in a sense moving through different focus points of your multidimensional sense of presence. So what that means is that many people are not seeing their confusions as their clue to their clarity. You must see that when the mist comes, when you don't know, you must make peace with it. You must not think that you're in such confusion that death is upon you, you know. What that means is many people attack themselves by not trying to get involved into the overwhelming aspects of life. Life will give you overwhelming stuff, you know. Have the ability and cultivate the ability that you can confront any situation of form. What that means is that, you see, man right now is still judging his form. That's why you have someone who's cool and someone's not cool, right? That's why you have some people who are popular, some people who are not. That's why we have poor and we have rich. However, the wealth of man is in his understanding in how he's really looking at life. So when you really look at what you are keeping as value, you realize that value is there based on the ideology of a sense of self. But are you an idea? So when you look at this, you realize, okay, can me, through an individualized process, understand my collectivity by constantly just looking at the individual stuff? Well, in a sense, only if you allow a sense of selfless observance within you to simply be. Many people are not allowing for their greater understanding to be present simply because they kind of know it, but they don't have imagery or anything to do for it. What that means is that sometimes, you know how, let's say, let me say it like this. Let's say you and your friends are walking and there are people playing football and they need more players, so you're invited to a football game. You're aware that's a game. That's a way of engaging reality with different focus points, with different priorities, such as the goal becomes important, you know. So we have many goals, you know, in a game. And so what you really see is that man acknowledges many games to see that he is in one. You are in a game. It is not the physical game. It is not the Monopoly game in your memory. It is simply a game beyond thought. So what that means is that you recognize that there's no way for the player to step out of this game of life. And so you have the depth of the mystic's eyes because you're looking at the unknown and asking existence, who are you? And show me who I am. And in a sense, existence has instantaneously always answered you. And so it is you who are not convinced by the answer. So the peace must be in how firm your legs are on the ground, not the mist that is around you. Do not make your confusions too intense for you to acknowledge, to then fear by giving it overwhelming imagery. Sometimes life gives us overwhelming imagery. What that means is that the human being must cultivate the ability to observe and in a sense of self-communication and awareness of that communication, see how image is more important than what image has to be like. Do you realize this? The observance of image is more important than what image has to be like. So for example, if I take the method of going, for example, in a very, let's say, academic approach and really just not going into the mountains to experience the great falls that one can sit under, but you, in a sense, you must see that clarity is beyond searching for a knowledgeable answer. Because many people seek a knowledgeable answer due to many conditions within their thought process, many circumstances where there's an audience. So for example, if I ask you, who are you, man? And you're like, whoa, and you go in, you see that it will not be sincere if you still are trying to give my voice a response. What that means is that you must have an acknowledgement and an awareness to yourself in a way where you're really hearing yourself. Your thoughts are your reception. It's as if you're tuning to that radio channel, right? And so you tune into another channel and it becomes emotions, more intense, right? And it constantly shifts because in each experience that man finds himself to be present in, there's always a greater exploration of presence. And so the mist, which was at first in a dynamic of, let's say, confusion. In other words, what I mean by that is that at first man considers that he has a problem, so he can do something about it. So we say that first stage is denial, then it's acceptance, for example. You know, people are denying it and then they accept, right? Or in a sense, that's the whole point, that you at first don't want to acknowledge the reality of your greater health. And so when you are forced to, you at first don't like it, but then realize that that is the nature of being. So what that means is that the Buddha has a very interesting story where his parents knew, based on a symbol on his foot of a wheel, I believe, that the Buddha, he wasn't a Buddha yet, but he had a potential to be a very mystical yogi or a very spiritual man or whatnot. So his dad, who was an emperor or king or something, he didn't like it. He didn't like it, so he just trapped his son in his house, pretty much in the way many of our youth want to be trapped. What that means is that he had a huge house, he had I'm pretty sure women, money, and everything, you know, gold and food and everything proper. And the king never let his son to go outside of the castle walls because he didn't want his son to begin analyzing a reality of, let's say, something that a monk would see or a mystic would see. Because a mystic would go and embrace life in its raw form. So you're like, forget human communication. I'm going for life communication, and that means a more intense experience of who am I and what I am and what my moment really means to me. So Buddha was always just, you know, this prince was in his cage, and he didn't know it was a cage because that's all he knew. And once he goes outside with his, I think, servant buddy, and his servant buddy takes, and as he's walking out, he suddenly sees that, wow, when his eyes open to the outside world, that what is death? It's like as if he's never seen what death is for like maybe a lot of his young. Imagine like being 20 years or something and suddenly being like, whoa, what is this death? Do people die? Do people age? Is there suffering? And boom, his mind is open to realities of a chaotic nature. As in that the person who, many people think that the kids born in abundance are, in a sense, lacking in understanding. But in a sense, no, because they are observing the limitation of wanting to be rich in an infinitely changing realm. So what is a very, let's say, proper thing one can do is recognize what is significant in your life. Is it your shape in a world where shapes change? Or is it your awareness to shape which has always had an eternal hue? And you see, Buddha, in other words, the prince, when he saw suffering and death, his fragile reality of being in this playful illusion where there is wealth and abundance and all this broke, because man has an ability to observe another experience of another man. What that means is that you can always, if you look clearly enough, feel what another person's feeling, regardless of that. So what that means is I might not have gone through the same experience to feel that emotion in you that is attached to those experiences and imagery which you went through. For example, many people go through very hard experiences in life where it's as if life is slapping them in the face. And when it does, it is very important not to pick up burning coal and get angry. Because when you get burning coal, not just your hand burns, but the person who you throw it to. So when life is being cruel to you, observe that cruelty and let your compassionate expression express clearly. What that means is that become the grace of the pond that knows regardless of how many rocks are thrown in it, the ripples will stop. And so greater senses of being will be present. So what that means is that a long time ago, a man confronted suffering and recognized that the way out was simply the middle way, in that you do not keep the spectrum of a good and bad world where things are constantly attracted to the other side, so you're stuck into just seeing this realm, but you have a multidimensional acknowledgement of your being which is unspeakable. So when you discover a sense of intelligence that's unspeakable, you come and say, hey guys, stop speaking. Because when we are creating realities where our attention is going to a more limited and more solidified range of experience. Because once you observe the clarity of the still mind, of the silent mind, there is no noise or movement that will bother you, confuse you, because you're the awareness that keeps it there. And so it is time for advanced communicators to recognize that the reason they are advanced because they are their communication. What that means is that when I speak a word, I in a sense become that word in that moment. And so it's an existential allowance which is important because you're not thinking about allowance. You are always allowed, my friends. However, your sensitivity and your sense of it's as if you do not just have free choice in just doing whatever. Free choice means that you can also have a sense of awareness before even thought enters your mind. You can be present outside the proximity of your limitation. And when you are, that is when you find legs that have always walked differently. And it's very pleasant. It's like looking at a tree in winter and suddenly realizing, oh wow, you know, there's apples on this tree that can inspire man in the spring. So it's very important to be aware of it in that manner, because mankind is moving towards a degree where he is simply being a greater acknowledgement of self. You're not just acknowledging yourself, but you're acknowledging all humanity. You guys need to see that the great leaders of our past stood for reasons. Their reasons were eternal. So what that means, all the great men of our past, regardless of how or condition or what they did, their sense of intention to get involved in life, their sense of purpose was for all mankind. It wasn't an individual purpose, but was one where there was such collective vision that the individual allowed the individual to go where it must. And so there was not just one prophet, but in the minds of each human being, you have stood on plateaus where you were not limited by your own feet. And so there's a significance, because imagery needs to come. So what that means is that many people, their enemies are not their enemies. Your enemy is not an external thing. It's the relationship you have with the image in which your memory and experience is given color to in such a way which you don't like. So when I say you don't like, I am saying the idea of you is not resonating with it because it's not identifying with it. And so you will see the greatest identification with all existence is non-identification, because then you become the transparent clarity and the beautiful light of man that observes all that is. So you see, your learning is not just from learning how to, for example, read a book or just do something physical. It's actually learning how physicality is kept in your awareness. And so this requires your own compassionate, sincere, personal involvement. Because that moment where you are in front of the mist, and trust me, the things that man thinks he doesn't know, for example, you're like, I don't know this, this is still a confusion on a terminology level. When you go to existential confusions, it's like, you know that word you didn't know what the meaning was? Imagine that word suddenly being everything you know. And suddenly you get these profound doubts, which are in a sense the refresh button on the browser constantly being refreshed, so the page is totally loading again, you know? And so we hope in updating browsers for next generations. Because, you know, it's very important what operating system man has. Because he is creating that system, and it must be him who evolves his own system. So if you get a job and you don't like the job, but you're tolerating it and going and doing it, you must see that during the time of your job, physically you're occupied. Physically you have to, for example, go do the things you do. But mentally, on a subtler level throughout your day, if you acknowledge all movement through a space of stillness, you can constantly be thinking about other stuff as well. And it's not like you're thinking, it's just you're having an awareness to any conception of a thinker that can accumulate or in a sense be shaped into a form. So the observance of your formless presence means that you are always going into form. So like we think that we were just born here once. No, every moment of your existence is a conception that is being kept. And so there's an infinite sense of change. There are cycles happening within cycles that man cannot even consider any accurate cycles. So what that means is the only accuracy you have is the observance of your physical being. It is as simple as that. And what the observance of your being means is that you observe that the mist is there because your eyes are open to it. You realize that every problem is present because that is how the present is showing itself to you. And so even though there may be familiarities, you may get many deja vu moments, but when a being forgets a part of himself, all that you can do is remember. So if you think you have forgotten it, if you think you have been imprisoned, many people have this ideology that we're in a prison planet. in regards to consciousness and the imagery in regards to spirit. And if that resonates for you, maybe perhaps experientially you've experienced something that's suggesting that, but I want to tell you, do not keep prisons in your eyes. In other words, your ability to acknowledge your consciousness as simply just being, existence, in the now, in the present moment, suggests how clearly you will be able to confront the nothingness which everything you have thought was meaningful needs to confront when you die. So when man has to acknowledge his death, he prepares for it by realizing he does not need to think about death. He just needs to live life with the clarity of an authentic expression. So the greatest teacher for me was the simplicity of the natural world, because I would see that all complexity has rooted from a simple spark. And even though science has called it a Big Bang, but when you recognize the ability to observe an expanding universe suggests the ability to also observe it changing in different ways, you see that man's consciousness could never be man's consciousness. So how we say human consciousness is actually not clear because it's still creating boundaries of illusion based on how the terminology is presenting itself. So man is nothing he can name or shape. He is the awareness to all shape and name. So if I tell you, are you just your name? You're like, no, don't you see me standing here? I do. But why are you treating then some names as if like they're, do you know what I mean? It's as if the way it has been said that you treat your neighbor is important. And so sometimes your neighbors are the thoughts that have come to you. So when you have a thought in your mind, or you're simply aware of it, it's not really in your mind because that's a conception on its own, but as you're aware of your thoughts, you can see that you're also aware of how you're aware of your thoughts. And so there's a profound sense of a transition in how you're aware of things that gives you that sensitivity. What that means is that if I put a spoon on a table and let's say that we say that this spoon cannot move, right? Now, if the spoon suddenly gets thrown to the end of the room, you'll be like, oh, definitely the spoon can move, right? But suddenly, if someone tries to move the spoon and the spoon only moves a centimeter, right? It is a different reality, but you are still like the spoon can move. Do you know? So the problem with the measurement is that it is keeping itself blind to the other side. So what that means is that if I have a two-sided coin and I just tell you the coin is tails, I mean, I'm not wrong, but I'm not complete either. So we see that science is not flawed, but in its embrace of a greater intelligence which has always sparked within man's eyes. In other words, the Big Bang within man. They will see that the conception of time and space is fluid. So our theories will focus on no longer trying to explain the universe before they have even explained the experience of space and time. And so all of philosophy and all of science must be focused at immediately observing space and time and to get greater visions of it through man's communication. So we need all those people who thought they were rational and everyone else was irrational, and vice versa, you know. You are required to dissolve your spectrums of individualized reality and to be in the presence of one another. Do not forget, the most graceful thing that a being can do is be present. And so you being present by another being, you will learn so much by simply how your presence is there. So what that means is that there are some students who ask questions and require immediate answers to get some existential allowances for them. For example, someone who in a very academic, or not in a, it's not limited to academia actually. Someone, let's say, who thinks they know it, you know? And then suddenly they start asking questions to tackle another person's knowing, to tell them that, hey, I know it, you don't know it, you know? We will find that the psychology of man has forgotten why it was aware. You are not aware here for competition. You're not aware here for thinking that you're wasting your time. You're aware here for a direct experience of self-awareness. That is the simple purpose of any being in its dimension. Because you must be aware of the nature of reality and also the nature of reality that is within you. So there's an aspect of you that will, even at the time of death, realize it cannot leave because it is here. And so you must put down, just like a scarf, the many shapes and forms you have associated with to be something in a reality which is somewhere. So think of your dimension of experience, physicality, as simply how a vaster collective being just had an intention to look at it this way. So when you look at it, that vaster collective being is not one that has form. So you see, you're only scared of something if it is in a bigger shape than you that can attack your shape. But when you recognize that the nature of your being is the eternity of observance, it's simply just the emptiness of clarity, which is simply in the nature of how you're observing things, then you see that there's nothing you can fear because you have confronted your whole plane of existence. You have, in a sense, looked through new eyes to see that you were never blind. And so you have made peace with the mist. Because there's nothing that can confuse you when your knowing and clarity is coming from such a deep aspect of your self-understanding of your own truth that you no longer need to verbalize your truth. You simply know it. So think about it this way. You know that, for example, where your house is or where your home is or your shelter is. You know where your place is, right? You have a certainty of it. So if someone comes and says that, hey man, this is my place, you'll be like, no, this is my place, because you know it. So that intensity of knowing needs to, in a sense, be found in the trust of greater realities of observance. So what that means is that man is, okay, he went from ape, let's say, based on the evolutionary chart, into man. And now, man is going into an existential mirror where it's as if it's a maze of mirrors. So what that means is that man is recognizing that he's infinite, but he also has an aspect of his dimension beyond his infinite. So you will see that we are right now very excited when someone does crazy stuff. For example, someone walks on water, something like that. But what is really exciting is when you become aware of how reality is being kept, not as the immediate reality, but an instant of knowing which has sparked it. So what that means is multidimensionality is very vast because you're, in a sense, going back through how you have come in. What that means is there is a very beautiful return and reunion when one transitions from physicality into their greater and more omniscient and omnipresent observance of reality. So when you're present everywhere, you realize that your eyes are so present in every corner of this plane that you don't need to have individual eyes. So for example, when everybody in the room has my attention, I don't need to speak twice. So similarly, we need to recognize that our clarity is there and there is actually here. And it is an existential allowance because, you see, many people learn to be compassionate, and one of the biggest lessons in this plane is to be compassionate to your enemies. But to be compassionate to life, what that means is that at the end, when your time comes and when your transition is happening, you are such compassionate that you're such allowing that you are seeing your moment of experience is transcending from any position of consideration just into a vast sense of knowing, a present knowing. No shape, no form, but an ability that is infinite. And so this infinity is not one that man can linearize, but can always get inspired by. So that is why we can even create the concept of self-inspiration, where your solid aspects are observing their liquid aspects and realizing solid reality that is not like this. So what that means is that after I observed the depth of my eyes to a certain degree, I noticed language did not have the same effect on me, because I knew myself. So when you are able to be comfortably silent, when everyone has picked up every book in the biggest library in the world and are just reading it to you loud, you will see that your silence and stillness, so at first a sense of pushing everything away, will then give you an understanding of how your hands can even push things and pull things. And so what that really means is that you are aware of yourself mainly for your life, or the human being is aware of itself mainly for its life as just creation. And then it gets involved with other creations, and so it feels more creative, and then suddenly it begins looking at itself, and suddenly it has more creativity, so it just sees more out of things, so more images pop up and more creativity comes. However, man must recognize that there is even transcendence in artwork. So if you thought you were the only thing evolving, think again. Because when the dot dreamed of the line dreamed of the plane. And when the plane tried to fly off, past those clouds of confusion, past that mist, there was no plane. Because the plane was no longer on the platform. So it's very important to cultivate an observance of just life, nature, reality, and how you are alive. In other words, look at your hands, look at your body, look at your face. And because many people who are not taking care of their body are not just looking at this incredible, in a sense, machinery they have. And it's mainly because the media is not saying how valuable people are, or just saying how the values are being killed every day based on the news reports that people are getting. So what that means is that we really don't want to bother anybody in this reality, but only to increase our own awareness of all that is. What that means is we're not trying to create enemies. We're not trying to shape others to be the people who are not allowing us things. We want to be very graceful, and my talks are for people who are very able to observe compassion. You must have such a compassion that you allow your enemies to sit at the same dinner table. And what happens is that when you treat your enemy as if he is simply another aspect of life just growing, and so you're just allowing complete communication for that being, you see that your enemy will look you in the eyes and see that this man has no intent to hurt me. Why am I hurting him? And so it's not really that simple, but all these are how human beings have senses of, let's say, empathy or sympathy. Even criminals understand the cruelty that they're doing, but they are doing it with a justification of being insensitive to other people. So what that means is that when a child gets hit or abused, it gets an understanding of the world that life wants it to be a fighter, for example, or be a hustler, or be someone who is standing up to the oppression. So the child begins to consider oppression based on experiences that reality is like that. If the child does not have an awareness of a calm nature, in other words, if he does not have experiences that he can be a good person, he has no choice because he's given ideology in being a bad one. And this is very hard because we have very bad environments on this planet that are not helping the man's psychology. So we need to have a responsibility of understanding that we need to become a clear unit if we are being measured. If you're considering yourself here, make yourself an authentic aspect of reality. Become very natural. Allow your body to heal. That's a concept not enough people realize. Allow it to heal. What that means is that your heart is harmonizing on its own. So allow life to give you the rhythms that will give you clarity, that will cleanse you like waves of light, just clearing you of any doubt, because doubt can no longer step in that room. And when you are met with your own door of perception, you will see that within you there is always infinite possibility. But outside, you are choosing how you experience that possibility in regards to external reality. So very simply, smile after you really taste the good meal, you know. Be open, allow your communication to grow. What that means is don't keep thinking you're the person you thought you were, you know. Simply grow naturally, walk calmly. Thich Nhat Hanh has a quote called, and it's a very profound, in a sense, quote of guidance. Smile, breathe, and go slowly. And this statement is all you need as a pilot of consciousness, because you are being moved to where you are required to be in life. Just have your attention to the moment so you're not looking down when you're in the roller coaster that is giving you a beautiful scene, that is giving you a beautiful visionary. So appreciate reality and always understand that your work works with you. So what that means is that sometimes confusion or the mist is a requirement for you to step up into a greater stage of ability to perform your task. What that means is I right now, after going through certain experiences, I understand why I went through those experiences. Because without them, I could not be in the moment that I am in now. And that, in a sense, is not something to linger on too much, but to simply see that beyond your ideology, there's a very beautiful place. A place where your eyes are not limited to shape, but are traveling through shape very peacefully. So they are never your eyes, because ideology does not even exist in that sense. If I was to create, let's say, a very cosmic sweater, and let's say if I was to make this cosmic sweater, you will see the needle, which has the string in it, is going through many complex movements of back in and out of itself. It's at times the inspiration of chaos theory, or at other times just insignificance. You know, you simply recognize that reality is moving, and its movement is not linear, because the minute you think that it makes sense, it doesn't. Because you have the ability to see beyond it. That is why I don't knows are profound guides, similar to how everything you know is also guiding you beyond the knowledge that you know, or in a sense beyond the knowledge that you feel you have. Because a sense of havingness means that you're still a bit selfish, because there is simply an idea which you're trying to expand. You're trying to save your idea more than you're trying to actually see where the clarity of your idea, where the clarity of your sight originates from. Make peace with the mist, my friends. For there is no better way to dance than with all of existence by yourself. Much blessings and namaste.